Hippocrates, the father of medicine 2,500 years ago, said all disease begins in the gut. The guy was right. What he should have said, but he didn't know at that time, is that all disease comes from a leaky gut. And how that manifests, whether it's eczema, whether it's psoriasis, whether it's acne or rosacea, probably has more to do with actually the bacterial species in our gut. For instance, we know, and I talk about in Gut Check, that people with psoriasis have a distinct microbiome, a dysbiotic microbiome. In other words, there's certain bacterial species that are fairly unique to people with psoriasis that people like you or me who don't have psoriasis uh, don't have. And when we reestablish a more healthy gut microbiome of biodiversity and we seal the leaky gut, then the psoriasis resolves, which is kind of what I do. I actually still see patients 6 days a week, even on Saturdays and Sundays. So because I get to see all this happen all the time.
Yeah, can you unpack what it's a term that's thrown around a lot. I know the audience has probably heard the phrase before, but you mentioned the phrase leaky gut. Can you kind of expand on like what that actually means? I mean, you think leaky tire, right? There's a hole in it, air is coming out. Like, is there just a hole within our gut that bacteria or whatever is kind of excruciating out of?
That's actually a pretty good description. If you had asked me 20 years ago when I first started what I do now and asked me about leaky gut, I would tell you it's pseudoscience. And so people still think that, but it's not. Thanks to work by Alessio Fasano, who is a pediatric gastroenterologist at the University of Maryland, who's now at Harvard, he actually figured out and proved how, in one case, gluten, which happens to be a part of wheat, causes leaky gut, intestinal permeability. And simply put, so we got that tennis court lining our gut. And that tennis court is only one cell thick. So that everything that stands between everything you and I eat and all of our bacteria that live in us is only one cell. Now, those cells are held together with what are called tight junctions. And those of us who are old enough played a game called Red Rover, Red Rover, where two lines of kids cross arms and somebody comes running across and tries to break through. And believe it or not, the game exists in all cultures, has different names. Fun fact, it's not allowed to be played in schools anymore because it's too dangerous. Your listeners might get a chuckle out of that. All right, so we're all locked arms. And what happens is that these proteins called lectins actually flip some switches and they make gaps between these tight junctions. So they break the arms. So now there literally is a gap in the wall. On the other side of the wall, 80% of all of our white blood cells line the lining of our gut. 80% of them. Why? Because this is where mischief can come across. So, undigested food particles, these plant proteins called lectins, bacteria, pieces of bacteria called lipopolysaccharides, LPSs, they can go through these gaps. And our immune system goes, holy cow, we're being invaded. Our borders have been breached. The walls are down. They send troops to the wall of the gut to do battle. It actually ends up causing more problems like friendly fire. But we scramble our fighter jets because now we're at threat level 5, and we send out immune cells all over our body to look for, have these invaders gotten past the border? Are they on our skin? And what we think now is called molecular mimicry. These protein invaders are recognized by literally molecular barcodes, like a barcode. Do I have a barcode? Yeah, there's a barcode. And we have barcode scanners on all of our immune cells that literally read this barcode. And it says, oh, that's a good guy, or, ooh, that's who I'm looking for. That's a troublemaker. Now, the problem is that the barcodes, we'll use skin for example, in some of the proteins of our skin look very similar to the barcodes of some of these troublemakers. They're not quite the same, but we're now at war. And the fighter jet sees these barcodes on our skin and says, oh my gosh, this person has troublemakers in the skin. They don't look quite right, but we're at war and I better shoot first and ask questions later. So we start attacking these proteins in our skin and it gets all red and raw. And that's a sign that of this inner battle that's going on now manifested in our skin. And so it's the molecular theory, molecular mimicry theory of autoimmune diseases. And with each passing year, it becomes closer and closer to a proven hypothesis rather than just a theory.
Yeah. On this topic of skin here, you mentioned something back earlier on around sunscreen being a bad thing. And it's like I perked up and I'm sure, 90% of the audience was like, whoa. So I wanted to circle back to that because for me, it's been probably close to a decade since I put any type of sunscreen on my skin. And I don't have any damage at this point. I spend a significant amount of time. I live in Tampa, Florida. I make sure to get regular sun in the morning. I make sure to get out daily. And every time I'm with people, they're like, you want this? You need to get protected. You need to protect yourself from cancer. Why is sunscreen a bad thing? And what should the audience know and understand about the dangers behind it?
Two things. Number one, sunscreen, unfortunately, is loaded with what are called endocrine disruptors. Another word from them is xenoestrogens. They are hormone like substances that bind to hormone receptors, particularly estrogen and testosterone receptors. And unlike normal hormones, a normal hormone, let's use estrogen for an example. Believe it or not, guys need some estrogen. We don't want you in touch with your feminine side, but guys still need some estrogen. So normally estrogen or a hormone attaches to a receptor on a cell. It gives its information, very much like people getting off the plane on a jetway. And then as soon as it gives the information, it leaves, it backs off, and it's done. What these fake hormones do, these pseudo hormones, they attach to that receptor, but they don't let go. So that they keep the receptor activated. So what happened years ago when the Environmental Protection Agency was looking at these compounds, and they're in plastics, they're in sunscreen, they're in scented candles. They said, oh, well, yeah, they are hormone-like substances, but they're in such tiny amounts that they'll never bother anybody. What no one anticipated was the fact, yeah, they're in tiny amounts, but because they never let go of the receptor, they have actually infinitesimally worse things than if you were actually taking the hormone itself. And just to use an example, which hopefully is obvious on the beach these days, there is a whole generation of guys walking around with man boobs. And where the heck did that come from? Well, among other things, it's from our sunscreen. There's a lot more to it. You're right. I haven't used sunscreen in 20 years now. It's that dangerous. Now, there are a couple that are safe, primarily the zinc-based or the titanium-based, but all the rest, they're actively absorbed through the skin. Number two, and probably even more important, we were all supposed to be exposed to sunlight on a daily basis. Why? Because we have to have vitamin D, and we manufacture vitamin D from sunlight exposure. And vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. And I spend a lot of time in the book pointing out how important vitamin D is actually for the health and wellness of the wall of our gut. It actually modulates how biodiverse our gut microbiome is, and it also mitigates against autoimmune diseases. Oh, and by the way, the higher your vitamin D level, the safer you are from melanoma. Everybody's worst nightmare, I guess. And so we, even in Southern California, in my patient population, 80% of the people I see who walk through the door are vitamin D deficient in Southern California. And you go, what? Wait a minute, you guys live in sunshine. Well, we don't. We're afraid of it. We put on sunscreen, to go pick up the mail. We wear hats, we wear long clothing to protect ourselves, and we've done our entire body a huge disservice. Um, in fact, the University of California, San Diego has a big vitamin D research lab, and they think the average American should take 9,600 international units of vitamin D3 a day to have adequate levels to, among other things, prevent cancer. And we know that people with cancer actually have very low vitamin D levels. So now, what people go, well, wait a minute, what about sunburn? Well, I eat my sunscreen. I eat I eat time release vitamin C. I actually use a product that is it's a type of fern that blocks UV light that you take orally. And I have no relationship to the company, but it's called Fern Block, and it's a pill that blocks UV light. And I eat, like I talk about in the book, huge amounts of polyphenols that actively protect my skin. So there's all sorts of ways to mitigate the effect of sun exposure.